Hey everybody, it's your pal Globenaut back in Kerbal Space Program, and I've got the commentary for my last cinematic here for you today. This one was a nightmare. It was not an easy one to record. As I mentioned in my community post, I had a lot of issues with this design. I had to rework it a few times. I'll put a screenshot up of the original idea, but the plan was I'll build this massive interplanetary vehicle, send the rover and the crew all in one ship, and land it on Mars, bring them back. A few issues. Primarily, I had issues with the structural pieces and the drop tank getting stuck inside. That was due to the attachment nodes. I had placed them wrong. I had another issue as well when I was flying the original version of this mission where the simple fuel switch mod, I'm not sure if I was just stupid and forgot to switch to fuel on some tank. That's probably the case, or there was this bug where it switched the fuel tanks back to liquid fuel and oxidizer rather than just liquid fuel. But I ended up with less delta V than I thought I had, and it turns out that the delta V readouts for these engines aren't accurate in the VAB, because they changed when I got into the actual flight, which is weird. I think that's to do with the fuel tanks, but yeah. Anyway, point is, I had issues with the drop tank, which meant I had to restart, and then I also had issues with the fuel tanks and the delta V readouts, which meant I didn't actually have enough fuel to complete the mission. So, went back to the drawing board, and I thought, it's kind of based on the constellation architecture anyway. Let's take some more inspiration from that and send the lander up to Mars first, get it into orbit, and then we can rendezvous with it, with the crew, get the crew in, send them down, do all the things on the surface, bring them back up, and get the idea. So that's what we're doing now. We just assembled the lander in 2 launches, and we're using the nuclear engines there to burn and get to Mars. I'm going to leave this in orbit, and then we're going to send a crew up later on to take command and land it on the surface. Once this worked, it was very satisfying, I must admit. It's been a really cool mission. It's by far the biggest Mars mission I've built. I'll put a screenshot up here as well of the size comparison of the last one to the new one. It's kind of ridiculous, actually, how much bigger this spacecraft is, and that's because I just tweak scale, so I was able to build some larger launchers based on the Ares 5 proposed rocket, which was one of NASA's Constellation Program rocket proposals. It was going to be a super heavy lift cargo rocket, and so I sort of based my latest launcher on that. Of course, we ended up with the Space Launch System, which is not as large and not as capable in terms of tonnage to orbit, but at least we got something, right? Here we are in Mars orbit. A lot of parts mods were used for this. I did mention in my last commentary video what parts mods I've installed, but just to cover any questions in the comments. Primarily I'm using Restock Plus, Near Future Technologies, all of those mods, they're great. They really integrate well with the stock stuff. Mark II Space Plane Expansion, Mark III Space Plane Expansion, not used in those, and Tweak Scale I use for this one as well. Tweak Scale is great. It used to be really overpowered, but I think they've actually, with the latest current version, it seems to have been balanced quite nicely, which is great. So yeah, you can basically change the size of parts. It just gives you a bit more flexibility with the building, and it adjusts the fuel values and the performance based on the size, so it's not too overpowered. Just got the second booster into orbit here, and this is for the crewed aspects of the mission. So I'm building up this big crew ship based on the Constellation Program, and that was a program in the that was supposed to be the primary space flight program for the US after the shuttle era ended. The idea was they'd reuse shuttle components to create the Ares 1, which would be like a crew launcher. You'd be a solid rocket booster first stage, and then the Ares 5, which was going to be like the cargo rocket, which I just mentioned, and that would reuse lots of shuttle parts I think the proposal was you reuse the RS-25 engines before moving to RS-68s, something like that. And that was going to be like a super heavy lift cargo vehicle. The premise was it would be used to land astronauts back on the moon with the Altair lander. They'd assemble the rig in low Earth orbit, send it to the moon, land on the moon, and eventually the goal was a crewed landing on Mars, and this is kind of what this is based on. In the Constellation proposal, there's 3 vehicles. You have the lander, which we sent to Mars, which they rendezvous with, and they also send a second lander, which has the ascent vehicle for Mars. So there's a manned lander with a habitation module inside, and a lander which houses the ascent vehicle. They send the ascent vehicle to the surface. I think they'd use ISRU, in situ resource utilization, and that just means they'd make the fuel on Mars for it, because there's a certain chemical reaction you can do on Mars which allows you to make, I think it's liquid hydrogen fuel and liquid oxygen, which is rocket fuel, right? So they would do that on the surface, fuel up the lander ahead of time, send the ascent stage, fuel up the ascent stage ahead of time, send the lander to Mars orbit, and then build the cruise ship, send the cruise ship to Mars, group up with the lander, land the habitation module with the crew on board near the ascent stage, explore Mars for about 500 days, get in the ascent stage, which is now ready to fueled up, send up the ascent stage to the crew ship, and send them home. That was the idea anyway. Some of the parts of this proposal survived and that are flown now. Like I said, the space launch system is kind of a derivative of this idea, and the Orion capsule is what sent astronauts around the moon recently on Artemis 2. That was initially proposed as part of the Constellation program. And speak of the Constellation program, this is my rendition of Ares 1. If you've ever seen the official design, it's got a wider top half and a skinnier bottom half, which is kind of weird to look at. I think it's a cool design. Of course, I think using just a solid rocket booster as the first stage is just incredibly stupid and dangerous. Solid rocket boosters are boosters that you cannot turn off once you fired them. They cannot be throttled. And of course, they are famous for the Challenger disaster, where there was an O-ring leak. So having an entire rocket based on this booster seemed a bit silly. Solid rocket boosters just generally aren't good for crewed vehicles, but hey, I'm playing Kerbal Space Program, right? I'm not risking any lives here, and I'm trying to recreate lightly with my own twist on it, the Constellation program. But we've built the crew ship here. Another thing that's interesting about this proposal was the inflatable crew compartment. Now, this has actually been tested in real life on the ISS, I think around 2016, something like that. They sent up an inflatable crew module. This has been an idea that's been around for a long time now, and it's the sort of premise is you can save space on the rocket by packing it up, and once it's in space you can inflate it, and it just means you don't have to build these big bulky crew modules. You can just send up these inflatable ones, and I think it's done quite well for itself as far as I recall. It sort of exceeded expectations, so that's good news for future space missions. Hopefully it'd be cool to see interplanetary vehicle one day with crew on board, but at the moment we are where we are as a species. We just kind of have to accept the fact that we didn't go to Mars, and we haven't been to other planets yet, but you know, I can't complain too much. There's lots of cool stuff happening in real life. We just drop the tank there, it's out of fuel, so we drop it just to save some weight, and that increases our delta V. And now we're on our way to Mars, just doing some course corrections. Once I had this assembled and flew it, it was actually really good. The process was quite straightforward. The delta V margins were quite reasonable. I didn't feel like pressure in terms of I need to make these maneuvers really efficient, or I'm going to run out of fuel, or there was no moments where I thought I'm about to run out of fuel here. I think the closest part of this was the ascent and docking. I'd almost run out of fuel with that, but I didn't, right? So yeah, I probably could have flown it more efficiently as well, to be honest. But here we are, arriving at Mars, just doing our capture burn. No error braking on this one. I think there was a proposal adjacent to this kind of mission type where they would use aerobraking. It's quite an effective way to save fuel. When the capture burn here is 600 odd meters per second, and to rendezvous with the target is going to take even more because I'm not captured into a circular orbit here. It's quite an eccentric one, so actually you'd probably save a good amount of fuel just aerobraking in real life and in the game, of course, but we're using nuclear engines here, so they're actually quite a bit more efficient, so I don't have to concern myself so much with the fuel budget. I think the Constellation program's proposal was also nuclear engines, which is interesting. We've never actually used them in space before, despite the efficiency gains over chemical propulsion. We did test them on the ground, I think like the 1960s or 1970s, and they did work. So we know that this technology works, and nowadays we'd have the technology to actually make these work, probably even better than 40 or 50 years ago, but we just haven't done it yet. I think there's a lot of safety concerns, of course, over nuclear propulsion. There are proposals to test it, and they're, I believe, still ongoing. They want to put one in space and test it, fire it, and see how it would go, and I'm all for that. It would be cool to have this technology fly, because we know it can work. Of course, I think the biggest developments in propulsion, space propulsion recently, has been Hall effect thrusters. About 10 or 15 years ago, I think we never had used them before. We knew they would work. Theoretically they would work. They use magnetism and electrical energy to generate thrust. Small amounts of thrust, but it's very fuel efficient. So they're used for space probes and things. And I think SpaceX were the first people to actually fire one in space and use it functionally on their Starlink satellites. I could be mistaken, but that's I believe that's the case. And now they're one of the most common, I think the most common form of propulsion in low Earth orbit, of course, because there's so many Starlink satellites which all use these Hall effect thrusters. They're kind of alternative to ion thrusters. They're sort of in the same family. There's a great video by Scott Manley who covers the types of electrical thrusters, and they're great little videos. Completely off tangent here. I'm not even talking about the gameplay now, but we're landing the lander here, and in this design I wanted to combine the two landers from the Constellation program. So of course one had a habitation module on board, and one had the actual ascent stage on board. Now I'm not using any ISRU for this, so all the fuel's packed on board ahead of time, so I don't have to get any fuel into the ascent stage, which we're firing now. And behind the ascent stage there's a big crew cabin for them to hang out in and live in. So I wanted to kind of combine the two designs into one big lander, which is what I did there. We're just ascending here, and like I said, this was the part of the mission where I had the concerns over Delta V, but I actually had more than enough. The ascent was just really poor. I had to keep changing direction in order to make sure that my relative inclination was as low as I could get it, and you can see I still missed it by a little bit, but I make the corrections here and I have just enough fuel to make the encounter work. I think with a better ascent this wouldn't have been a problem. The main issue I had was I had to switch to the ascent stage because the routing on the parts for the lander, the core part was the cockpit. So when I staged, I had to switch to the ascent stage, and I got a bit disoriented of what direction it's facing. The camera just decides whatever. So yeah, drama aside, we got there with 37 meters per second to spare and a little bit of monopropellant. So it was a close call, but we made it work, and we transferred the crew back into that habitation module there, the inflatable habitation module. One thing I also need to mention is I did modify the Orion inspired spacecraft. Of course, the Orion in this architecture would have had circular solar panels. At the time, that's the idea, was it would have two circular solar panels. Of course, since then they've changed it to have rectangular panels in an X shape. And in the proposed design, the Orion module would dock to the end. I just thought it'd be cool to have it dock inside the structural piece there, so I removed the solar panels and I actually used the fuel cells to generate electricity. I didn't think I'd need the solar panels, primarily because the only times that it's going to be flying by itself is when it's on ascent in orbit to rendezvous, and then when it does the crew transfer around Mars. So I thought, put the fuel cells on, get rid of the solar panels. It's going to be drawing most of its power from the solar panels on board the main ship. And we're back at Earth. God, this has flown by. You know, I saw this is like a 30-minute... the way I edit this is I put the clips together, then I commentate over the top. I saw 30 minutes. I'm going to fill 30 minutes, but I'm almost done. I've just been rambling the whole time and I've not even thought about it. It's been the most smooth recording process. Sometimes I'll have a bad day and I'll fumble what I'm saying and I'll cut it out and I'll put different takes together, but this one's been perfect. I think because I've had a stuffy nose and a cough the last few videos, I've been so used to sitting there cutting bits out and re-recording, but this one's just flown by. This has been all one take. I've just been rambling on about the Constellation program, which for 20 minutes, which, you know, goes to show how much of a sad nerd I am about it. But there you go, we're re-entering the atmosphere. I can't believe it's over already. I thought this felt like a 5-minute video. I suppose that's a good thing, right? Maybe it'll feel like a good video to you guys as well. But here we are, re-entering the atmosphere, parachutes out, and we're already at the end. Jesus. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you liked it.